Alright, hey everybody. My name is Mark Wolf. I discovered the grand unified theory of game design. The basic primer is in the description below, and in today's video we are going to be talking about victory cannot be random. This is the last part of the theorem, and I think the easiest to understand. Of course, this follows from everything before, and just like in the issue of solvability, this is just sort of a consequence of the problem itself. That when victory is random, the player's decisions don't matter. It makes the game trivial. There's no reason to play if the outcome is random. You might as well just roll dice and see what happens, or not engage in the activity in the first place because that's a waste of time. So we can, see a few examples of this, something like Candyland, but I'm not sure going through examples is entirely useful because that would just be, pointing out a few games that have random outcomes. I'm not really sure there's really much to cover here. Victory can't be random. That doesn't mean that randomness can't be included in game mechanics, but it means that the outcome of each competition, no matter what abstraction level you're at, whether it's an individual combat or whether it's some larger outcome of a quest or a storyline or some cycle of the game itself or whatever, the outcome of those competitions cannot be random. Or it's trivial. It doesn't matter. The player's actions don't matter. There's no reason to engage in that competition. And specifically, you're doing this in a game, although I'm not sure there's a reason in any other activity for the outcome to be random except in a random generator, which is more a tool. So randomness isn't a game, and for other discussions, which these have no bearing on, something like, toys or puzzles, which somebody brought up in a comment, which, very interesting topics, but I haven't figured them out yet, if ever. I have no intention to, no plans to. It could happen randomly, as things have, but so far it hasn't. So on those topics, I have very little to say, but randomness itself does not make a toy or a puzzle or a game or a sport or a story or anything. Randomness itself is chaos. It can be used for something, but it has to be harnessed in some way. And I think the best way for game design is statistics. And I've mentioned this before, this was at the start of the series. One of the most important things that a game designer can understand for randomness and solvability and balance and fairness and just a whole bunch of things in game design is basic statistics. Understanding statistics and combinatorics and logic and sequential systems and like a whole bunch of systems. Like game design involves a lot of systems analysis, and you need to be aware of all of these moving parts moving in your head together. You need to be able to see the whole and see how things come together and be able to run through sequences, run through, thought experiments and examples and variables, especially, for video game design, for running tests and for designing certain mechanics. There's a whole lot of things that you can't arrive at, whether it's game design or art or, whatever, just thinking about it. You do actually need to get something up and moving on its feet to see how it moves. But in order to understand those things and how to iterate on them, all of these things are very, very useful. And on the topic of randomness, making sure the outcome isn't random, I don't think is very often sneaky. It's not something you're ever going to accidentally do, unless it's some very outlier example that I can't think of right now. In terms of every game design that I've ever made, and in terms of most ones that I've ever seen, the inclusion of randomness and its impact on the outcome of the game is very explicit. It's very clear. It's not something that the game designer wasn't aware of. It's not something the player isn't aware of. It's more or less something that is just, like many things in not games, sort of just accepted because there is no alternative. There is no real game version of Candyland, not just because there isn't a non-random version of Candyland, but also, of course, because Candyland is a board game, so no matter what you do, you can't ever arrive at a game making it a board game. But random outcomes, yeah, there's just not much to say about the topic because it's pretty clear. It's pretty easy to understand when you're iterating on things in game design. You always know where your random generators are, especially when you get something up and moving. It's really clear the impact of randomness because you instantly feel how much control, how much fairness, how much balance there is over each situation. So it's pretty obvious, if not in thinking about it, in testing it, whether randomness is involved. And of course, it's very clear in design. You're the one putting the randomness in there, so you should know, where it's going. But I don't think there's also very much instinct, even in video game design, to involve too much randomness, because when you do that, it almost ruins the activity too much, even for not games, because there's no way to really capitalize on that, even as a scam. The randomness is involved in other things like the packaging and distribution, like special versions of something you might have, but those aren't mechanically relevant unless, well, not having to do with like the randomness of the availability of something, but I mean the randomness of the mechanics. Like, even in Magic the Gathering, where you might have some win conditions that are random, which I think are bad cards, it's not too much of a ding here on Magic the Gathering, because I think a lot of those cards are designed in jest, or designed with, like, very, very earnestly with a playful intention. It's designed to be chaotic. It's designed to be, what's the word? Disruptive. It's meant to shake things up, which, maybe for Magic the Gathering is sort of like a Freudian design slip, where, even the designers want out of this nightmare that they're in, and they're like, oh well, let's just throw a goblin gambling game card, whatever. I forget what the card is. Actually, there's I think there is, it like the Heuristic Studies does a video. Is it Goblin Game? Yeah, okay, that's what it is. Yeah, I think the card is called Goblin Game, and Heuristic Studies does a video breaking down the actual statistics of Goblin Game, and so that's that's an interesting look at that card. But Magic the Gathering doesn't necessarily suffer from randomness in the same way that Candyland does. There is randomness involved in Magic the Gathering, but that's one of those things where the statistics are harnessed in the game mechanics, because although you shuffle your deck, you have full control over the distribution of cards in that deck. And for tournament legal decks, I think you're not even restricted to exactly 60. I think, and the same is true also for Yu-Gi-Oh! As far as I know. You can play with more than the minimum. So you have full control over what cards go in your deck, and it's important to understand that for the sake of statistics and for game design, that the tournament structure, where for a card game you're playing a match, which by standard is best 2 out of 3. So those matches allow for the otherwise outlying issues of randomness to be resolved in statistics, where you may get in Magic the Gathering, although you can mulligan, let's say you do get a brick hand, and let's say a mulligan really does take you down to an unfair disadvantage, where it was really just like a once-in-a-lifetime unlucky shuffle of the cards that ruined this one hand. I think even that could still be mitigated in the match structure, where if you lose the first game and it really is a fluke of randomness, then, well, I guess we can sidestep the pay-to-win issue and just say that regardless of whether it's money or skill, that you will win in the second game of the match if you are the favored player, whether it's by money or skill, whether by skill or fiat. So maybe that's more like an advanced topic that we could get into later, is like, if you're going to include randomness and it's in a card game design that heavily utilizes it, ways to make sure that you are fully covering any leaks of randomness into the victory conditions. So, but I mean, like I said, very easily, unless your design doesn't allow for it, the match structure of iterative play seems to be a viable solution for, and it's simple enough that it can be universally applied to a very wide variety of game mechanics. No matter what kind of card game you want to design, it works also for Mage War. So I think this is probably, because this is the end, before I get to the next video covering the bringing together of all of these topics and getting at the more philosophical question of, like, why do we game? What are some of the emergent properties here that we could start to see if we start seeing an industry dominated by real games? What is that? What are some of the things that could give us? I think now is a good time to open it up to questions, now that we're at the end, whether it's about randomness or anything else, future topics. I know there's a couple of future topics that people have brought up that I'll get to for, more advanced topics. We're starting here in the 100 series, and we'll continue on now into the 200s after this. And who knows, maybe I'll just abandon the numbering system after a certain point and just kind of, get into advanced topics. But actually, after a certain point, what I also want to do is really just start taking a look at some games and some story and crossover ideas, and just kind of like just talking about topics in general and just sort of examining ideas, and maybe doing a couple, doctoring videos, like, here's how you could fix this, or here's, where I think this could be improved, or something like that. But yeah, if you have any questions, put them down in the comments, and we will see where this goes. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you learned something. See you in the next one.